Our next panel is titled Leading Military Women, Commanders, and Trailblazers in the United States Military. Our moderator for this panel is Laura Rausch, who has a distinguished career as a combat correspondent for AP, I believe, and is now a policy analyst in the United States Congress. So, Laura, I'm going to leave the program up to you. Please welcome Laura Rausch.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here today with such a distinguished group of military leaders. I would like to begin by asking each one of our panelists. Apologies, can everyone hear me? I'd like to begin by asking each one of our panelists to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your career, and tell us what inspired you to join the military.
Start in the end. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. I'm Diane Weber. I just retired in January after about 32 years in the Navy. And so there's a little blurb in the book about the last 5 years of my career, and probably online there's more. When I do these things, I usually spend a little more time talking about things not in the bio. 32-year career, I came in at a time where women couldn't go to sea. There were limited flying opportunities. And the opportunity I chose to take was to track submarines. And I did that for a while until I met my husband, who was on active duty. We met in Hawaii, got married, and began to share a career together. We were a dual military couple. We have 4 children. The oldest is 26, and the youngest will be 20 on Sunday. So between dual military couple, and he retired as a captain some years ago, we opted to let the live-in nanny go, and he became Mr. Mom. And there was there was probably a 7 or 8 year gap professionally, so he was a little bit senior to me, and that gave me the opportunity to go to sea. By the time I'd reached the 15, 16-year mark, there were opportunities at sea opening up for women, and I took the first one I could get on a carrier, and then went to command after that. My husband and I have both had command twice, and it has been a real interesting ride, as we say in the Navy. 2 thoughts. I have had 8 or 9, I've lost count, designator changes, which is kind of your career field. I only ask for 2. The others just kind of, I was informed about. I read about one in the Navy Times. That was helpful. But the world as you know it today will change. And we all acknowledge that. I remember sitting where you are sitting and thinking, right, I got that. Living it is a little bit different than understanding it. But it's possible to get through those changes. You have a choice, you have several choices to embrace the change and help drive that new future, or you can just kind of choose not to choose, which may leave you twisting in the wind. And I think it should be intuitively obvious what the better choice is. The second thought is when I was younger and foolish, I should say, I used to talk about work-life balance. And I used to do this quite a bit because as a dual military couple, and we had 4 kids, everybody wanted to know how, why, oh my goodness. That was frequently a reaction. And the more we got into our careers, and it was 2 hard-charging careers with 4 kids, I began to realize there's no balance, really. You have priorities, and some of them are personal, and some of them are professional, and they're very much tangled up together. And then you have the choices you make about those priorities. And sometimes your family will come first, and sometimes your career will. And I'll just pass the mic to the Lieutenant General.
Hi, I'm Kathy Gainey, and I've just retired as well 2 years ago. And I'm currently working as a consultant. And I want to just say that for my military career, I'd never planned to be in the military. My father was in the military, and I said I would never drag my children around. So I said, absolutely not. But, you know, you do what you have to do when you're in college to get money, and I needed that $100 you got out of ROTC. So that's the reason I joined ROTC, and I was going to just then be a reservist. Then I ended up coming on active duty because I couldn't find a job when it came time to graduate. But we'll stop on the past career, and I'll just talk about the fact that I just finished as the Deputy Commander for U.S. Transportation Command, which is one of your joint functional commands for the combatant commanders. But my career was as a logistician, and I pretty much stayed as a logistician all the way throughout, but started as a transportation officer. And I had wonderful opportunities to do lots of different things. There were career fields that were closed to me in the beginning that opened up as time went on, and that gave me a lot more, shall we say, desire to stay in the military when I could do a myriad of different things that I hadn't in the past.
Good morning. Can you hear me? My name is Lieutenant Colonel Germano. I'm actually still on active duty. I have about 6 more months remaining, and I just ran my last combat fitness test this morning and maxed it. So I'm ticking those milestones off, but as I look out at the audience, I'm absolutely amazed that I'm sitting here because I feel like I should be sitting where you are. The time goes by so quickly, and you may not feel that right now, but if you think about it, think back about where you were 2 years ago, where you were 4 years ago. And by bringing that up, what I mean to say is that you can't allow yourself to think, I'll get to that at some point. I'll get to that later. I don't want to deal with that now. I don't want to make that decision now. I'll get with that later. I'll make that decision later. You need to seize the moment and seize the day. You need to bloom where you're planted, and you need to make sure that you are your best advocate. I actually came into the Marine Corps growing up as an Army brat. I had a long tradition of Army service, career service in my family, and I chose to join the Marine Corps partly because I wasn't smart enough to get into the Navy, and partly because when I experienced what the Marine Corps was about, I was very drawn to the high standards and the elite culture, if you will, of the service. And what I will say is that while I'm ending my career on a downward slide, if you will, after being relieved, and we'll talk about that later, what I will say is that the Marine Corps has been very, very good to me. It's been very good to my husband, and there have been many more positives because of people like you than there have been negatives. So I would just say before we go on, make sure that you seize the day at every opportunity, because before you know it, you're going to be sitting up here on a panel wondering how you're sitting up here on a panel when you feel like you should be in the audience in the theater.
Thank you. I'd like to ask now, what unique challenges have you faced as a female coming up through the ranks in your particular services? And you know, I think everyone knows we have the Army, we have the Navy, and the Marine Corps represented here, so a lot of diversity. So if you could speak to those challenges, and especially related to your service.
Oh, you want me to?
Yeah, I was handing you mine. Go ahead.
Oh no, after you. After you, please.
If you want to start.
All right.
Admiral or General?
I'll start. As far as challenges, there was a time in my very early part of my career where there were jobs that were closed, and so that was frustrating in that, you knew you could do the job, but they didn't feel you could. And part of that was just the logistics. I couldn't be a heavy equipment truck platoon leader. HETs are the big vehicles that carry around our tanks. And the problem was not that you couldn't command the same people that you were also going to command in a normal, shall we say, medium truck or heavy truck company, but the issue was when you got to your destination to pick up the equipment, they had no billeting for women. So that was the constraint, and that's what we had to work through in those early years. This was 1978. Now you've got women in just about every field in logistics. There is nothing closed to the women in logistics. And I think that's a tribute to a myriad of people willing to change the rules and make things different. And, I have to give credit to the general we had at the time. He finally, because he had so many more women coming in as platoon leaders and truck drivers, he said, okay, I will not be able to bring any more trucks to you unless you figure out the billeting issue. He called their bluff, and there were convoys that didn't move because they hadn't figured out the billeting. So this was in Germany, and they got religion, and they started figuring out where they could find to carve out areas for that. Later in my career, I did not really find challenges. There were, as long as you were competent and as long as you demonstrated your willingness to do the hard, tough jobs, I was given all of the same equal opportunities as others.
You know, I kind of put my challenges into two chunks, one related to my career and the second chunk related to, you know, how to manage 4 kids and a spouse who's on active duty as well, and make it all come together without destroying those relationships. So the first chunk, the career, I came in at a time where there were reduced opportunities, and those opportunities began to open up, and that forced a lot of changes, and they were good opportunities. But what wound up happening to me was I would be sitting there looking at the aviator, the submariner. They have very well-defined career paths, wickets to go through, and you know, I've just gotten a new designator. I'm in a new field, and nobody knows the way ahead. And it was really disconcerting to me and my peers that you could see well-defined ways ahead in the organization, and here we were caught in this churn. You have to get over that. You have to get over the notion that there are things that you can do to control your destiny to get the next promotion, because it's really about bloom where you're planted. You take the opportunity, you make the most of it, and you move on. And you make choices based on your priorities, personal and professional. And at the end of the day, wherever you land, you can choose to be happy because you've thought out those choices. And that's what my husband and I wound up doing. I will tell you, for the conversations we had as a dual military couple, there was an age gap, so he went to an EXO tour and I took a job in San Diego. I just took a job in San Diego because we needed to be co-located. Then it was my turn for an EXO job, and he took a job in the Pentagon, which turned out to be in the J5 Joint Staff at the point in time they were trying to sign a treaty, so he was coming home at 8 or 9 o'clock. So during my EXO tour, when it was supposed to be my turn and he was supposed to take care of the kids, that didn't happen. So you really have to be able to communicate with your spouse, to include expressing some frustration. We lived a year, I made an adjustment at work. I only did paperwork. I had a red folder system. It had to be signed at work. Then I, as EXO, went to the red folder, signed it. Everything else went home in a couple of bags. And as soon as, you know, Charlie came home and we got him, you know, situated and fed and the kids were off in bed, then I began to do my paperwork. But those kinds of choices and decisions and discussions with your spouse are key to being able to move ahead and feel like you're moving in a good direction and in a good spot.
Okay, so I'm in the Marine Corps. You all probably know that we tend to be the slowest when it comes to evolution and adopting new practices, particularly when it comes to equal opportunity. And so my biggest challenges have actually been recently, and I'll just tell you up front, if you're not familiar with my history, you're probably wondering why I'm sitting up here with these wonderful ladies and all that they've accomplished when I was just relieved from command about 4 or 5 months ago. And I'm going to tell you that I was relieved for command because I made very specific decisions about holding my Marines accountable and making sure that we were being held to a very high standard of conduct and a very high standard of professionalism and high standards for training and excellence. And so my challenge has been that when I was a lieutenant, when I was a captain, the qualities that my male peers were being applauded for were the same qualities that I was applauded for in terms of leadership. The Marine Corps doesn't discriminate in terms of the leadership traits and principles. They're supposed to be unisex, right? So it was really when I became a major and I took command for the first time that I started to realize that there was this pretty severe generational difference between me as a major and the colonels that I was now working for and the general officers that I was working for. And I bring that to your attention because you all need to understand that this is going to be the decade of the woman. And I don't say that as a feminist. I say that because it's just point blank. The greatest evolution that we're going to see over the next 10 years in the military and in our country will be in terms of the amount of responsibility that we give to women and what we expect from them in return. And so while I was relieved from command, and that was a very difficult part of my life, I stood on a principle that was very important to me. And so what I would tell you is at this point in your career, as you are leaning forward into becoming officers in the military, the most important thing that you need to do is determine what to you is a matter of principle. What would you stake your career on? What would you stake your life on? And if you know what those things are, make sure you live every day to keep those in perspective and to make change happen. And then acknowledge the consequences that come and understand where you played a role in the process of change.
And just to drill down on that shortly, you have had you had a unique experience, I think, and you have a pretty interesting purview about what unfolded. And do you mind sharing that? Because I think some of the people in the audience may not understand that, especially, you know, essentially how you changed things and how you changed the scores and shooting and so forth, and the accountability and how that mattered.
Thank you so much. So if you're not familiar with Parris Island, there are two places where we make enlisted Marines. One is MCRD San Diego, where only male Marines are made. And then there's Parris Island in South Carolina, and that is the only place where we make female enlisted Marines. So when I was a lieutenant colonel, I was selected for my second command, which was to lead the 4th Recruit Training Battalion, which is the only female training battalion in the Marine Corps. It's completely segregated from the males. And one of the things that I found when I got there was that for decades, the female recruits had been allowed to underperform. And it was almost as though the fact that we were segregated from our male counterparts every day in every way allowed a lack of oversight from the leadership and generated a sort of climate where we just assumed that the women weren't able to do what the men were able to do. And so one of my priorities when I got to Parris Island, the main priority that I had, in addition to maintaining good order and discipline in my battalion, was to ensure that my Marines that we were making and my drill instructors were competitive with their male counterparts. And this was most important to me on the rifle range because, as you probably know, for those of you who are familiar with the Marine Corps, our slogan is every Marine a rifleman. Have you heard that before? So every Marine a rifleman, but it seemed like every male Marine was a rifleman because for the female battalion, we had an initial qualification rate that was 30% lower than the male qualification rate. And what that meant was we had fewer Marines graduating as expert shots, but predominantly we had about a third of every class being recycled as drops on the rifle range. And for decades, that had just been allowed to be acceptable. So when I got there, my first priority was to change that because I figured, you know what? First thing Marines look at when you walk in to check in to your unit is what badges you have. And if you're wearing a marksman badge, which is the one that looks like the pizza box, that's what we call it, they automatically assume that you're not a great Marine. And I wanted to change that for my recruits and my Marines. And so we made that a priority. And it started with me. I went to the pistol range, and for the first time in 18 years at that point, I shot expert because I dedicated time to training and I made it a priority. And I figured if I'm going to tell them they have to do it, then I need to do it first. So it started with me, and then every single Marine followed in trace. Every single drill instructor made that a priority. And in less than a year, what we were able to accomplish is we were able to take our initial qualification rate from 68% to 70% historically to 91%, which was competitive with the males. And I don't want you to applaud, but what I do want you to do is recognize your role in changing perceptions. Because it's not just perceptions about women. When we were integrating, the Marine Corps was the last service to buy off on integration. And so we had African Americans who were allowed to join the Marine Corps, but were automatically assumed to be less than. Someone played a role to change that, and you heard the previous speaker. The bottom line is that we still have to do that for women. And what that means for you, men and women, is that you need to recognize your role in that process because this isn't just a female problem. And as males, as male officers, if you have a female in your unit, you're going to be expected to lead that female, just like I've been expected and these ladies have been expected to lead males. So just recognize what your role is to foster change and make that change happen, because it can happen. And now women are shooting on the rifle range in Parris Island, and they're qualifying as experts, and they're graduating, and they don't know differently. They just assume that everybody can shoot and everybody can be a rifleman.
Thanks so much, Colonel. This next question I think I'd like to direct to Admiral Weber and General Gainey, because you've had long distinguished careers and you've seen so many changes in your career. I would like to talk for you to speak briefly to this group of folks who are, this is a fairly young audience for the most part, and I think I don't know if they understand or realize just how many changes have taken place for women in the military over your careers. And if you could just speak to some specific instances of where there's been significant change that you've seen or that you helped perpetuate.
Oh, well, I've already talked about my designator changes and the fact that women just didn't have opportunities. In fact, I was in a community called General Unrestricted Line, and the men shortened that to girls, and then there was a memo that came out saying you can't call them that. So, I mean, that's kind of the environment. There were a handful of flag officers. I remember thinking at the time, ooh, no opportunities, and they, I just didn't think it was reachable. So I didn't think about it. I mean, that's the goodness in that is, okay, there's one or two of those, old folks that make flag. Some of them are women, and they went to jobs that I was not interested in, but very much needed to be done. As I progressed through my career, some of the changes were driven by me. So I was tracking submarines, and there are a couple of places where you can do that, and a couple of them at that time were very remote. My husband is was a ship driver, and so he wasn't going to go to those places. So some change driven by circumstances and the choices I'm making to have a family and a spouse, and some changes imposed by the Navy itself. As I got through my career, I had an opportunity which I fought for. They opened up the combat systems officer billets on the carrier. They had an initial round of women go through it. It didn't go well because those women weren't prepared. They weren't trained. If you've not been on a ship ever before, they were just vilified for not even knowing how to cross the brow. And of course, the solution is so simple to say, this is the way you do it. So I was in the second round of women that went to sea, and I was stepping into a billet. My female predecessor had been sent TAD to Bethesda. She was considered expendable, so I step into that. And of course, it's my first time on a ship, but my husband's a ship driver, so he did say, don't screw these things up. So that was very helpful. But I stepped into an environment where everybody was pretty angsty about me. I felt like the CO and the XO, and possibly rightly so, because I haven't been in that environment before, and I own combat systems, which is to say, a pretty large chunk of the fighting capability of that platform, fighting and flying capability of that platform. They made me explain things in more detail. They asked me more questions. We're doing post-ace, and everybody's going around the room, nothing significant, nothing significant. I could never say that. Never, ever, ever. And yet all the guys could. I have, even till the end of my career, frequently been the only female, senior 05. I was the only female head of the department on the carrier. I wound up doing all the Women's Day celebrations, making those speeches, yay. But that even kind of perpetuated, there were other women in the room, but at the flag officer level, not necessarily so. It would have to be a pretty large gathering. So some changes, not enough, I think. We have a long way to go still.
So from my perspective, within logistics, at the lower levels, it pretty was wide open as far as the opportunities that they allowed for young women. But in many of the other fields within the Army, there were not. It was not, they just didn't have the helicopter opportunities. They didn't have the opportunity to go to the field artillery and to many of the other branches. Over time, I got the opportunity to see that change and to see people have opportunities to branch out into something different. And those of us who were already in fields that did pretty much allow women, we tried to encourage them to keep going and tried to find opportunities to champion them to other people that we knew they were good quality officers. And if there was anything we could be in the way of a teammate to help them pull through, we did that. What I would tell you is that as we got up in senior in rank, then the number of women significantly diminished because there were women that didn't think that they could do both. So I am also married to a former military officer. We both did 35 years together, and I was going to get out when we got married. We married late. We had already been in 16 years, and he said, no, don't. I think we can make this work. Now, it'll maybe a little bit more difficult. What we did for our challenge was to just say, get us in the same time zone, because we knew that getting us assigned together would be very difficult. And then we would make the commute on weekends, or every other weekend somebody would be driving to go see the other person. As far as career up in the senior ranks, again, you had to really prove yourself. And the challenge that I saw was getting people to see you as a peer, because like these other women, you're normally the only woman in the room, and you're definitely the only woman at the front of the table coming forward. You know, unlike in the Bible verse of wait to be asked to come to the front of the table. As a senior officer, I had to make sure that I pushed my way to the front of the table. Otherwise, I wouldn't be included in some of the decision-making that would be very critical. You'd have to find out about meetings that you wouldn't be told about and then just show up and sit at the table. And that's how you got your word in, and that's how you made sure that people understood that you weren't going to back away from key tasks and that you were going to ensure that your issues for your organization were going to be heard.
So I would like to know from this panel, do you think there will ever come a time when we won't have to have panel discussions about female leadership? When we'll become so integrated that we'll no longer need to have these kinds of discussions? Or do you think it will always be important to circle back and take stock of where we're at?
I'll take first stab at it, and someone's probably more articulate. I think we will always want to come together and either get that historical perspective and just do a pulse check on where we are. But I increasingly think it's a family issue, and you see Anne-Marie Slaughter sort of taking that tack. For the longest time, we've tried to push women ahead. Because of my circumstances, it was very much a family issue for me. My husband endured comments about being a kept man, who wore the pants in the family, and he was a retired Navy 06. It's a family issue. It's how we want to afford families in this country an opportunity for both parents to work and both parents to have time with their kids, if they so choose, and still have them be competitive and viable. I've worked for people who didn't go home, who slept under their desk, on their desk. When I was a lieutenant 04, I would look at them and think, what's wrong with them? Why are they so inefficient? And there weren't enough people asking that same question.
Very good points. And so I would have to say that I think it'll be your grandkids may not see this as an issue, but you're still going to see this as an issue, and you're still going to have to take on the challenge to make sure that everybody in your organization is treated as an equal. And I won't even talk about the women issues, just any issue that people, whether it's race, gender, creed, whatever, you're always going to find some people, unfortunately, were not raised with thinking that I have to treat everybody with respect and dignity. And that's what you have to approach. You have to approach that you have to help teach some people that, And you have to demonstrate that every day on duty and off duty in your own behavior to get others to emulate that.
Such a great question. You know, I already talked about where the Marine Corps is on gender issues. We tend to be the last of the services to embrace change. And part of that is because of our culture. But you all are going to be the beneficiaries of what we haven't done to this point. And so when I say I think that the next decade is going to be about the woman, it's not that we're forgetting the men. It's just that there's a lot of work to do to ensure that there's opportunity for all across the board. And I think the Army is doing a much better job. The Navy's doing a good job. I think the Marine Corps has a lot of room to grow and maneuver. And so what that means for you all, regardless of what branch you choose to go into, is that you have to earn your seat at the table through credibility and through demand, but you also have to hold yourself and others accountable for doing the things that your service thinks is important. And part of that is the high standard piece. High standards should be across the board for all and not just for one segment of the population. And the more we encourage high standards for everyone and hold everyone to that same standard, and the less we see that the leadership traits and principles apply to men but don't apply to women, the more this will never be something that we have to address.
Thank you, and I just want to give you an opportunity, and we've sort of spent the whole panel doing this already, but I want to give you a moment to offer up any advice you have for the future leaders in this room. It seems like there are many. That's what most of this room is, and so if there's anything specific that you'd like to offer up before we move to questions, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to do that. We'll start with you, Admiral.
Okay. I would just say choose wisely, and these days I'm reluctant to do these kind of panels because I sit up here as a flag officer and everybody wants to be there and wants to be that thing and wants to have it all. And as I read, you know, Anne Marie Slaughter and others who have written books on, there's an implication that having it all means you've arrived, you're sitting at this panel, you've had, you're rich, you're famous, you're CEO, you're a flag officer, you've been commanding officer. You can make choices to have a family and do what you need to do for yourself and family, and make a great contribution to the service, to the nation, or to any business or commercial enterprise you decide to engage with. But having it all needs to be your definition of having it all, not someone else's definition of, hey, they've arrived, they're in the magazine all the time, they've got a great title, they're making a lot of money. Make sure that having it all is your definition of having it all.
I would start off by saying, first off, you've got to love what you're doing. And if you don't love what you're doing, then you need to find another career field. Okay, I ended up falling in love with being a soldier, and it was something I never thought I would be. And it was something that gave me challenges and opportunities, and that I grew and that I learned. So I would say that to succeed, you need to be, first off, competent. Second off, you have to do the best job you can do at every single job, even the jobs you think will not be career enhancing. And I say that because you're going to be known by your reputation. And your reputation is what's going to get you a job that you don't even know you're being considered for, because somebody told somebody else, hey, I think so-and-so is coming up on a reassignment. I think you ought to grab them because they'd be perfect for this job. That means that your conduct on and off duty is going to play on all decisions, because people are going to see you and they're going to be watching, whether they be subordinates, whether they be peers or seniors. You also have to remember that with competence comes the standards that she so eloquently spoke about, the importance of holding people to standard and never walking away from a lesser standard. If you do, you have just endorsed that as an acceptable standard. You can never let that go. You can never sacrifice your integrity. The principles upon which your service is founded has to be woven throughout everything you think and do. But last, I will tell you, have fun and enjoy it. And if you don't, go find another great career.
Who knows who John Boyd is or was? Who was he? He's a guy. He's an Air Force officer who was the most renowned fighter pilot in any of the services following World War II. And he did invent the OODA loop, which is much misunderstood, but is a great concept. I'll leave you with a John Boyd quote, and I want you to listen to this quote. And as we're talking about principles and knowing what is a matter of principle to you, keep this quote in mind. And if you've heard it before, forgive me. It's about the fork in the road. And John Boyd would serve as a mentor to a lot of junior officers, and this is a quote that he would talk to them about at length. John Boyd would say, and you're going to have to make a decision about which direction you want to go. If you go that way, you can be somebody. You'll have to make compromises, and you'll have to turn your back on friends. But you'll be a member of the club, and you'll get promoted, and you'll get good assignments. Or you can go that way, and you can do something. Something for your country, and for your Air Force, and for yourself. If you decide you want to do something, you may not get promoted, and you may not get the good assignments, and you certainly will not be a favorite of your superiors. But you won't have to compromise yourself. You'll be true to your friends and to yourself, and your work might make a difference. To be somebody or to do something. In life, there's often a roll call, and that's when you'll have to make a decision, to be or to do. What will you do?
Thank you so much. I think we have just a few minutes left for questions, or are we out of time completely? We're out of time completely. Okay. I want to thank this amazing panel for both your service and then for speaking today. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else here did too. Thank you so much.